Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. In this episode of Thinking in English, I want to talk about COVID variants. What is a variant? Why are there so many variants right now? Are these more dangerous than the normal COVID virus? Do the treatments we have still work? Let's discuss these questions in this episode. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. To contract. To contract. To contract means to catch or become ill with a disease. For example, he contracted malaria while he was traveling. To acquire. To acquire. To acquire means to get or to buy something. For example, he acquired that company in 2008. Variant. Variant. A variant is something that is slightly different from other similar things. For example, there are 4 variants of malaria, all transmitted to humans by mosquitoes. To mutate. To mutate. To develop new physical characteristics because of a permanent change in genes. These changes can happen naturally or be produced by the use of chemicals or radiation. As in, these bacteria have mutated into forms that are resistant to drugs. Mutation. Mutation. A mutation is a permanent change in a living thing, like an animal, plant, or bacteria. These plants carry the mutation for red flowers. Immunity. Immunity. Immunity is a situation in which you are protected against disease. For example, the vaccination gives you immunity against the disease for up to 6 months. Transmissible. Transmissible. When talking about a disease, transmissible means it is able to be passed from one person or animal to another person or animal. For example, to start a pandemic, the virus will have to be highly transmissible between humans. Booster. Booster. A booster is a drug or vaccine given to increase the effect of a previous drug or vaccine, and it helps to continue protect a person from illness. For example, he had his polio booster last week. After almost an entire year of living with the pandemic, it is still not over. In fact, globally, it seems to be worse than ever. Over the last few weeks, the number of new COVID cases every day has reached 800,000 across the entire world. In fact, more cases have been reported in the last 2 weeks than in the entire first 6 months of the pandemic. As you probably know, many of these cases come from India, which is currently experiencing a massive health crisis. Hundreds of thousands of people have contracted the virus in India, and the healthcare system is struggling to cope. Other countries could have similar situations in the next few months. In the UK, where I live, we have vaccinated millions of people and are now controlling infections. But most countries are not as fortunate. They have problems acquiring and using vaccines to help their people. You've probably heard the word variant used in the media a lot, especially when they are talking about the pandemic. The UK variant, the South African variant, the Brazil variant. These variants are making the situation much more complicated. Some variants have mutations that make it easier to catch COVID, cause more deaths, or make vaccination less effective. Worryingly, the more the virus spreads, the longer the pandemic continues, and the more variants will appear. The major challenge facing the world now is to vaccinate people as quickly as possible to contain the spread of COVID. If we do not vaccinate people quickly, there is a chance a new variant could appear, which could be immune to vaccination. Clearly, it is incredibly important to know about variants, but it can also be very confusing. So, I think it might be useful to look at some frequently asked questions about variants. So, what is a variant? Well, a variant is a slightly different version of a virus. Viruses mutate all of the time. As they spread, they make mistakes or errors or slight changes in their genes or DNA. Often, these alterations have no impact on the virus, or maybe they are actually bad for the virus. However, sometimes a change in the virus's DNA can actually make the disease stronger, faster, or harder to fight. A variant is a type of virus with some of these mutations. All of the variants of COVID-19 probably started as the same virus, but as it spread around the world, millions of people were infected. Different versions of the virus are found in different parts of the world. Why are there so many variants right now? One reason is simple. The virus is spreading to more people in more countries. Like I said before, the more infections, the more likely there are changes or mutations. And the more changes, the higher the chance a more dangerous variant will appear. A second reason is that millions of people are now immune to the original COVID-19 virus, which is great. People have already been infected or vaccinated, which makes it less likely they will catch COVID. However, it also means that variants that are not prevented by vaccines or immunity are becoming stronger. A third reason is that some countries were, or still are, struggling to have lockdowns or introduce measures to stop the disease. My country is an example. The UK variant was one of the first and most dangerous early variants. The UK was very slow to introduce lockdowns and measures like mask wearing, which created opportunities for more mutations. Another example is Brazil, which also has a Brazil variant, and Brazil struggled to have lockdowns across the country. A fourth reason is that we are now looking for variants. Right, it's difficult to find something if you're not looking for it. And now countries and scientists around the world are searching and testing viruses. Of course, we know about more variants right now. However, the scary thing is that there are probably many variants out there that we don't know about. Most of the testing and most of the scientists work in Western or highly economically powerful countries. In parts of Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Africa, South America, Eastern Europe. Perhaps there are other variants that we don't know about yet. Which is the most dangerous COVID-19 variant? There are actually 3 categories of COVID variants, which the World Health Organization use. A variant of interest is a variant that could make treatments less effective. A variant of concern is a variant that causes more severe disease, is easier to transfer, or makes treatment significantly less effective. And a variant of high consequence is the most severe category, with existing treatments and vaccines being significantly weaker. At the moment, there are 7 variants of interest, 3 variants of concern, and no variants of high consequence identified by the World Health Organization. One of the main variants of concern is B.1.1.7, or, as it is better known, the UK variant. It was first found in the UK last year and is now found all around the world. It seems to be easier to spread, easier to catch, and leads to more people in hospital. The other 2 variants of concern were originally found in South Africa and in Brazil. Are COVID-19 variants a major reason behind the crisis in India? India currently has over 300,000 new cases every day. This is probably a low number, considering not every person is getting tested. In fact, some newspapers are reporting it could be 10 times higher. 3 million cases a day. There are now shortages in hospital space, medical staff, protective equipment, oxygen, and even funeral spaces. There are many, many reasons for the crisis in India, but one factor is certainly a variant first discovered in India in October 2020. B.1.617, as it is officially known, is a variant that may be easier to catch and can avoid some of people's previous immunity. It is now the dominant variant in several Indian states. However, it's important to know there are other reasons too. In February, the Indian government declared that the country had defeated COVID-19, and restrictions on public gatherings were lifted, major religious festivals took place, and political rallies continued. Although India produces and produced most of the world's vaccines, they have struggled to vaccinate people quickly in their own country. It may be that the combination of the more transmissible variant, relaxing restrictions too soon, and a low vaccination rate are all causing the COVID-19 devastation in India. Do treatments still work? Unlike the beginning of the pandemic, there are now many treatments for COVID-19 that reduce the danger of COVID. However, some specialist treatments may be less effective against some of the variants. I'll leave a link here in the blog to some research if you are interested. On the other hand, most general treatments are not likely to be affected by the variants, so they should still work. Do vaccines still work? This is a little bit more complicated. Most of the vaccines being used seem to be effective against most of the different variants. One of the main exceptions, however, is the University of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which seems to struggle against the South African variant. South Africa is even selling all of its AstraZeneca vaccine because it seems to be ineffective. However, the vaccine is still effective against other variants in other parts of the world. You just have to look at the UK, which has predominantly used AstraZeneca Oxford University vaccine and has now significantly reduced the number of infections. Even the best vaccines are not perfect. Breakthrough cases are possible with all vaccinations. A breakthrough case is where people are still able to get sick after being vaccinated. It is not clear whether we will need new vaccinations for variants, or perhaps booster vaccines in the future. At the moment, it seems unlikely, but as more variants arise, perhaps the situation will change. Part of the challenge is that COVID-19 has only been around for a year, so scientists don't really know how long immunity will last from a vaccine or from previous infections. Several of the COVID-19 vaccines can actually be easily and quickly modified, which could be really useful in the future. So here is today's final thought. On this episode of Thinking in English, I've looked at some of the COVID-19 variants and some questions about these variants. Variants are talked about in the media all the time, but they can be really confusing. Will variants stop us from returning to normal? Maybe. Or a better answer could be only if we let them. The more people who are vaccinated, and the quicker they are vaccinated, the better chance we have at stopping variants. Our goal should be to get enough of the population immune to COVID-19 so that the virus can't spread easily. The biggest threat is the spread of COVID-19 in parts of the world that are not vaccinating people yet. And it is unlikely that the world will be completely vaccinated anytime soon. As countries reopen and international travel returns, controlling the spread of COVID-19 in other places will become even more important, as the chances of another variant spreading will increase. What do you think about COVID-19 variants? Are there any variants in your country? Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.